Discover how you can green your life by building a knowledge base of current sustainable and eco-savvy trends. This series will delve into hot topics, current standards and practices, ways to design better spaces, and specify materials that benefit not only us as consumers, but the world as a whole. Members of Green, as sustainable materials distributors, and other industry leaders weigh in throughout the series. This is Build Green, Live Green. Hi, this is Jessica with Build Green, Live Green, Green's podcast on issues facing the building materials industry. And today we have Nate Nay, who's the Regional Sales Director for JAS, and Trish Osborne, who's the Business Development Manager for JAS. And they are a huge logistics company based out of Italy who has been facing the brunt and a lot of the supply chain issues that are facing the industry. So can you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves and your company, and then we'll dive into supply chain and how you guys are navigating that so successfully.
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. And Jessica, thanks for having us. Name's Nate May. Been with JAS Forwarding for about 16 years. Held various roles within the organization, starting with operations, but mostly on the commercial side. Actually, going back to kind of where the biggest brunt of the challenges are, specifically to Asia. I spent 6 years as our trade lane director, focused on Asia Pacific, spending time primarily in Greater China.
Awesome. Trish?
And my name is Trish Osborne, Business Development Manager for Carolinas and Virginia. I've been with JAS for about 8 years and been mostly in the commercial sales position.
We're going to cover supply chain issues here, and you guys do both sea freight and air freight, and obviously sea freight and shipping have become a real pinch point in the industry, building materials, but overall in the industry as well. So can you talk about what JAS has faced in the last, I'd say 3 years? And do you consider this sort of an unprecedented time in the industry in terms of costs and congestion? And can you just walk us through some of those issues that have happened kind of up until where we are right now?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with this because this is kind of important as it specific to the DNA of our company first. Mm-hmm. And when, and of course, everybody kind of knows the timeline as to kind of how COVID spread and when everything mm-hmm. happened. Basically, starting in 2020, the beginning of 2020, where China was hit first. And then we saw that move to Italy. It was kind of the next to kind of quote unquote hotspot or whatever you want to call it. And then, of course, then from there on, it spread throughout Europe and into the USA. When this happened, particularly, we saw it with China, shutting down well before the rest of the world did. We didn't know what was going to happen. We've seen other pandemics or other outbreaks happen within China with other viruses that have came about. And usually they don't necessarily find their way around the world like this one. And certainly we've never seen anything like this one. But as a company, we were founded in Italy, but the three largest subsidiaries within the organization were China, Italy, and the US. So those are the three that were hit the hardest, the earliest. So we were actually very, very, our executive team was very nervous in the beginning that this was going to, basically not, I don't want to say it was going to not bankrupt our company by any means, but certainly it was going to have a serious financial impact on the organization. Mm-hmm. And it did for a short period. And certainly within Italy, it had a very prolonged financial impact. During that period, there was a heavy demand for PPE. So right after, we were kind of probably in about 2 month span from March until about May of 2020, where the executives were taking pay cuts themselves. They didn't fire anybody. They didn't lay anybody off, which was something that we were very proud to say that we weren't going to do that. In light of what we thought were going to be very difficult times, we saw a wave of demand for cargo come back, specifically for PPE products out of China, kind of once China started opening up to some degree. That helped us kind of get through those earlier, we'll just say financially get through those earlier times, those first few months, from basically about May until August. And that wasn't just a JAS, JAS was not affected by this. Pretty much every global freight forwarder of our size and scope and bigger and smaller all kind of stepped up to the plate to make sure that everybody was able to get PPE where not exactly when they needed it, but was able to do whatever they could within their networks to support the facilitating the movements of PPE. So that kind of helped us get through the troubled waters. But what we saw was one of the other industries that tanked or slowed down significantly outside of was outside of maybe building products was the automotive tier. So automotive industry just stopped because they didn't know what was going to happen for those first 3 or 4 months. And then what they ended up doing is the automotive industry came roaring back. And so probably about, I would say, August or September of 2020, we saw the automotive, all the large automotive tier one suppliers, which actually for us made up globally about 40% of our overall business and still do today. They went from being completely quiet to I need to charter this, I need to charter that. And then, of course, that's when the ocean market started having all the challenges with the blank sailings. And we started seeing all the congestion out of Asia. You started seeing the shortages specific to the microchips, which also kind of had an adverse effect on all of the automotive supply chains as well as many others.
So when you talk about automotive suppliers, just so I'm clear, are you talking about components that go to the automakers for assembly? Or are you talking about not the finished cars? Because
not the finished cars. We're talking all the components, are sourced, and pretty much any car probably has, I would say, certainly anywhere between 30 different suppliers across all over the world, not just in Asia. A lot of components are sourced out of Europe as well. So those supply chains are really complex, and all you need is one piece or one part.
I know.
And the term line down situation is something we hear pretty much every hour. Unfortunately. So
So I think also too, in our industry, I think when everyone was kind of stuck at home, it also created this demand for a lot of renovations and DIY stuff, and building materials cranked up too, as did appliances, which I imagine have a similar, obviously it's not as complex as a Ferrari, but a refrigerator has a lot of parts too. And there was a lot of demand for things like that. Or, I know that hot tubs and dishwashers were also very difficult to get. So that was kind of sort of mid-COVID to the end of COVID problems, right?
Yep. People just buying stuff because, like you said, they're looking at their house and they're like, either I want a new one, which of course has prompted the housing market to explode, or I don't like my kitchen and I've been working in my kitchen, I've been working
And here's 3 stimulus checks that I can use to pay for some of this stuff.
Exactly. And what everybody fails to, all of that stuff comes from Asia and primarily China, for that matter. At least not all of it as a whole, but at least a portion of that, or the components of that you mentioned for some of the more complex items. You're going to have to source that, most of that is being sourced out of Asia somewhere.
So talk about that, because this was where I thought things got really interesting that I don't think I understood or really ever thought about. There's a finite number of containers that are going back and forth across the ocean or sitting in a port or being loaded somewhere. And so when all this massive amount of demand is coming out of China, all the containers need to be there to service it and then ship back to the countries that are ordering them. Mm-hmm. But if there's not demand going the other way, these containers go back empty, and that's not desirable. And at the ports at the time, people couldn't get the empty containers back in, so they were abandoning them. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic?
Yeah. So what started first, and I have to kind of go back a little bit. So, when the initial shutdown happened in March, the steamship lines saw this, and they were also, they were also looking at this like, okay, we're going to have soft demand. And in the beginning, for the first, 3 or 4 months, there was no demand. So what the steamship lines were doing is they were pulling capacity out of the market. So they actually pulled capacity. I think it was, I can't remember the exact number, but about 11% of the global capacity, I think, was pulled out of the market from about March 2020 to about August or September of 2020. Well, the demand for stuff started coming because again, everyone's sitting there buying stuff online and everything and renovating and all that. And the housing market started ticking up. And what happened is they had a ton of capacity that they had to bring back into the market. Can't do it. You cannot. It's not like, hey, turn the keys on the boat and pull it back into the ports. It doesn't work that way. It's a process. So it took them, probably 2 or 3 months to get all of the pool capacity back into the market. By that time, it was already too late. The demand was way outpacing the capacity, and at the end. Yeah.
So they're trying to pull back the 11% that was there, but they need more than the 11. Because the demand is even higher.
Yeah. So just to put it in perspective. And again, these numbers got crushed in 2021, but at the time, so I think maybe October, November, and December of 2020, those were the highest. If you look at the ports in the USA, those were the highest throughputs that we've ever seen, and we've compared to any other prior disruption prior to that. So nobody, not the steamship lines, the ports, they didn't have the capacity to handle this kind of demand on such a short term too.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what kind of started that perfect storm. That is.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about that 11% container capacity, that's not a static number. That's a compounding number. When it's not there on Monday and it's not there on Tuesday and Wednesday, and that just gets compounded. And so you can see how that would create the issues. Yep. So then there were problems when there's that much congestion at the port. Then you were also having labor shortages because either people weren't motivated to go back to work because of compensation they were getting for not working, maybe unemployment or other. And also, some of these issues like COVID outbreaks. Those were
outbreak at the terminal, and they shut down the terminal for a couple of days, or have a skeleton crew for a couple of days, for a limited crew, and getting just bringing people back. It was definitely challenging at the terminals.
And then what about what I was mentioning with the empty containers? I don't think I ever fully understood that, but it's basically these chassis. A chassis with an empty container is not as valuable as an empty chassis that can take a full container. Is that correct?
Yeah. So let me maybe explain why we were seeing this. Number one is there was the demand, the U.S. export market still was relatively flat. Like it was for probably a good up until about mid 2021. You could get containers here, you could get containers, you could get space. Bookings were, there wasn't nearly as much delays, even though there was congestion on the import side. But what was happening is because the demand was so high for imports, the rates went through the roof, which you alluded to earlier in terms of they went up, as much as tenfold, right? Yeah. Traditionally, rates for a container to the West Coast was, in a normal environment, and this went on for 3 or 4 years. The contract season was around, $1,200 to $1,400 for a container to the West Coast, and then roughly $2,500, $2,500 to the East Coast. And that was for 3 or 4 years straight. That was the norm. Okay. There was, peaks and valleys, certain times, the tariffs, for example, would, maybe make it go up for a short term, but overall, that was kind of where the contract rates, particularly for like the heavier, the major retailers, the heavier importers that had direct contracts, that was kind of where the numbers were. Now, fast forward, they go to $30,000, which they weren't quite at $30,000 in 2020, but they were in probably the $10,000 range. Yeah, $10,000, $15,000 range by then. So what happened is the challenge that they were having is there was no equipment in Asia to load these. So they would have space on the ships, but they didn't have any containers on the ships. So what they were doing was they were taking all the empty containers in the USA that were still planted all over these deep depots everywhere. And you got to think about it this way: a container to Asia, for example, a container to China, you could maybe make, in a pre-COVID, it was $300 to ship a container to China.
Oof.
And it still hasn't gone up nearly as much. Maybe it's probably at maybe $1,000. Okay, so shipping. So here's what was happening: the steamship lines knew that what would happen is the primary goods that go from the U.S. to Asia, it's a lot of ag. So it's a lot of we ship a lot of food. We ship grains, pork, soybeans, all this stuff. So what happens is these containers get to China. They have a very complicated customs process that sometimes can take anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks. And a lot of times they're not getting delivered at the port area. They're going somewhere in the middle of nowhere, China. So it's going, central China somewhere. So what would happen is say, for example, we load that steamship line takes a container for $1,000 from the U.S., ships it to China, and then it has to go through that process to get imported, and then get sent somewhere again, whatever, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, China. They might not get that container back for another additional month. So they've missed their opportunity to get another $12,000 to put it, to give it to a factory and have that factory use it for their exports to the USA.
Wouldn't you think that they would? So before I ask that, let me ask this: were they loading these container ships? If it's $1,000 a container, that makes me think empty containers are very valuable. You want to get as many of those over there as you can.
Yep. And that's what they were doing, is they were loading. They were basically prioritizing empty containers to go back to China over, actual loaded containers.
And then my next question would be, wouldn't there be an incentive for the guy delivering the container to bring back the empty container if it was really a $12,000 container? Wouldn't you want to be giving these guys some sort of incentive to get that container back as quickly as possible? Or is it that they weren't using it straight away, which is why it was taking so long?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, is they weren't necessarily using it straight away once it got here, and that's the biggest challenge they had. And keep in mind, because two things, you mentioned the labor shortage, but what's been more of we'll call it a challenge, is the trucking shortage. You can throw all the labor you want at these ports, right? But if you can't get them out, if you cannot get people to, truck drivers or enough drivers available to get them out of those ports, it's not going to fit. It's still, they're just going to have a bunch of people shuffling them around all over, shuffling them around from one section of the terminal to the other. And that's what we were seeing in a lot of the terminals, is because we couldn't get the truckers to get them pulled, all of a sudden they start stacking up. And then what happens? So you got a stack of containers that arrives in Long Beach. Trucker shows up.
His is in the middle.
Yep. And the trucker goes, yeah, exactly. Or they say, yeah, it's at the bottom of the pot.
Yeah.
Pull them all down. So by the trucker's spending a day just waiting for that one container just to get it. And then eventually it gets out. And again, you keep compounding that and it just gets worse and worse and worse.
The other thing I've seen, and you guys can maybe talk about this domestically, because I think we've covered a lot of the sea issues. I think we can see how those all compounded. And locally, just domestically, the freight rates are very high.
Yep.
But they're also, the reliability is so low. I have had carriers lose A-frames with giant countertop slabs on them, lose them.
Yeah, how do those disappear, right?
I don't understand. And there's got to be more going on, but it also seems like domestically we're having a major freight issue as well.
Sure. And we didn't see the domestic market go haywire until probably 2021 is when the domestic market, and it started at the ports, but it's of course kind of trickled down through all of the LTL carriers, all of the regular owner operators, regular just kind of FTL services, because what everyone was doing because of the port situation, they started trying to use the other services, trying to transload. So they started, as you're probably well aware, warehousing especially along any of the coasts, is almost impossible to find.
Yeah.
And that's prime real estate. So when we were down at a, we were talking to somebody on the commercial retail side, and they said, yeah, obviously nobody's buying office space anymore or doing, it's all about warehousing, and that is kind of what's driving that commercial retail market right now. You guys probably maybe seeing it on the building materials side as well.
Yeah, what we've seen and what I've heard is a lot of people are just stockpiling inventory because they're scared about running low again. And that to me smacks of, the kind of the mortgage crisis when you're sort of compounding issues, thinking that you're doing the right thing. So I hope that that doesn't become a bigger issue, having all that kind of stockpiled building material if housing starts, do slow down a little bit. Certainly not in our market in North Carolina, but
I think we're good here.
So let me ask you this, because I think solutions for getting ahead of this, or addressing it in some ways. How is technology going to play a part in this? So you guys must look at technology, but like software technology at the ports, or kind of these logistical, softwares that can kind of see these constraints and data analytics and that type of stuff. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that software technology, and then also maybe a little bit about physical technology? So I've read a lot about these collapsible shipping containers, this idea of these containers that, they pop up, and they flat stack, and you ship them across flat, and then they come back full. Is that a viable option? And, kind of where are things going from a technology standpoint in the shipping world?
Yeah, so that's the new buzz. Everybody wants that visibility, end-to-end supply chain. They want to be able to see their stuff in real time, right? That's been the primary focus on a lot of the, pretty much the industry as a whole for the last. It's been before, but it's being exacerbated now because of all the challenges associated
and the changes in the transit.
Yeah. But I can say right now, look, that you can put all the pretty technology, and have all this really cool visibility. You see your container on a map sitting some terminal, but all it is telling you it's stuck. Yeah. So there's a lot of, but I think a lot of companies are doing it to help them when they get out with the hopes that this situation is eventually going to kind of sort itself out. And then they're going to have this, this visibility that they just didn't have pre-COVID, in terms of being able to see everything from the time an order drops to the time it gets to their DC. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's really valuable, because what I see it does on my end, and as well as on yours, it frees up my people. I don't want them answering the phone, giving updates constantly. When the customer has visibility into it, they can see it for themselves, and then they just reach out when they may have a specific question. But what I've told my team is, right now when things are difficult, communication is key. Don't not say anything because the news is bad.
Yep.
I would rather say, here's the latest update. It's not good, but here's the reality. And I think, our customers have been very receptive to that. So I'm not surprised to see, transparency and those kind of visibility of information, being required by customers. Ultimately it does alleviate, your staff from having to take those calls and get frustrated by having to give negative updates constantly.
Yeah, certainly that's taken a toll on our entire network, right? Is it takes a lot longer to get the truth, to the truth from where a shipment is. And again, going back to the technology, it's only as good as the network itself. And what we're seeing here is, even for example, even if we have direct feeds from all the carriers, if their information's bad, they give us bad information. We give the customers bad information. They give their customers bad information. And again, it's a never ending, cycle. What some of the platforms are doing now is they're actually using analytics, so that even though the carrier's saying this, right? The carrier's saying the shipment's going to be here at this point, they're using analytics to say, okay, wait a minute. The last five shipments that have gone on this this string, it's actually taken this long to get there.
Yeah.
So I would say it's I don't want to say it's an infancy stage, but certainly that will only get better as we get more reps. The problem is it works great in a stable environment where the analytics past history can easily predict the future. But every single scenario is pretty much, every single string is different from week to week. The instability gets worse and worse. So even if the analytics say, "Oh man, you were delayed 5 days last time, so we're going to say you're 5 days later than this time," they might be delayed 8 days this time or whatever. So
more data is more information, even if it's unstable across the board. I guess you just keep collecting it. And okay, so what about the physical technology, like I was talking about, the flat pack shipping containers, or any sort of improvement to the container ships themselves? Like, what's happening there?
One of the things that some people don't know is the U.S. ports, particularly the major ones, are of the least efficient in the world of all the major ports. They're and they're not even close to being, outside of LA, which is in, I think, in the number 10 or number 11 in terms of throughput globally. They're not the busiest by any means, but they are by far the least efficient. And it's not just the Asia ports; it's a lot of the European ports are more efficient as well. So these other countries have adopted better technology to manage the port throughputs. That is something that needs to be addressed here. And I know that obviously, and the hot button issue right now is the update of the labor union on the West Coast. Right now, they're renewing that contract this year, and certainly automation was a big topic of But automation is a word that sometimes scares unions because it's like,
that's what I was wondering. Yeah.
But everyone knows it's necessary, and that when we were at TPM, which is in Long Beach, you can just see the containers stacked up outside of when you're even downtown, you can see all the containers stacked up, saying, "Guys, you're not doing this right. Whatever you're doing is still not working." So. There is a focus, I know, at the terminal side on automation. It was a big topic of discussion, actually, at the thing we went to in Wilmington just recently. But I'll let Trish talk about the flat pack containers, because I'm number one, I don't know if it's going to help much, but
no, I mean it's like Nate, I don't know a whole lot about the flat pack. It's mostly for importing, exporting imbalances. Like, for example, a guy was explaining he was in the Army, and these containers would go to Kuwait or wherever, and they would just sit there because it was so difficult to get the container there. They would just leave it and then go out. But they could take these flat packs and stack them 4 high and send them back, kind of like the equipment imbalance over in Long Beach, where they'd empty them, wouldn't wait for the grains or the soybeans, and just send them right back for loaders. So the idea would be to help offset the equipment imbalance and import, or the trade imbalance. But right now they're not ISO certified.
That was going to be my next question. Is, I would imagine that's a big deal when there's so many different types of goods that could go in there. You really need to make sure they're stable, reliable.
Technology with the flat packs it has definitely improved and made it much more sturdier, and it doesn't collapse on people anymore. So that's also very helpful.
Well, this has been great, you guys. Thank you so much. I think we covered a lot, everything. I'm sure we could keep going, but I'm really excited to see that JAS is kind of at the forefront of these things and working with the carriers and staying on top of the solutions. And I look forward to working with you guys. And if you don't mind just telling our listeners where they can find information about JAS, and if you guys want to give your email if they have any questions about shipping or freight or anything like that.
I'll give you my email address. It's James, JAMES.may, MAY, @JAS.com, JAS.com. You can go to our website at www.jas.com And yeah, I love Trish.
And my email is Trish, TRISH.Osborne, OSBORNE @JAS.com.
Great. Well, this has been great. Thanks for being on here today, James, aka Nate May, and Trish Osborne. I'm Jessica McNaughton, and this is Build Green, Live Green.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.